Alright, so for this omelet, we used 1 handful of spinach, 8 ounces of egg whites, that's about 25 grams of protein, 2 eggs, 14 grams of protein, and then we threw on 4 slices of just meat, deli meat turkey, and that's about 11-ish, 9-ish grams of protein. And then what we'll do is once this gets heated up and we flip it, we're gonna put on 1 slice of a light cheddar cheese. And the reason I like light cheese is because we already have 2 eggs in there, and if we're trying to watch our fat content throughout the day, that's a macro that I think is very easy to eat a lot of during lunch and dinner. So I try to have a lower fat breakfast just because that allots me a little bit more wiggle room as I go throughout my day, and my meals might be a little bit more sporadic in nature. So for carbs, we do a half cup of oatmeal and a small banana. Super easy to do, anybody can make it. It's very low in fat content. It's a little bit more slow digesting with the oats, and the banana is just great for taste. It gives us a little bit of potassium, but I mostly use it for taste and just to up my carb intake a little bit more for the daily intake, and that's the microwave. So one of my favorite nutrition tips, especially for folks who want to maintain a certain weight or body fat all year round, or just hover around a certain level, is win breakfast. So I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I'm a nutritionist and say you need to eat this every day. That's not at all my game. My game is to give you actionable steps. So winning breakfast, what the heck does that mean? Well, the way I like to see it is that breakfast is always the meal that you can have full control over, right? So it's easy to prep first thing in the morning when you wake up. You can either eat it then, you could either make it, pack it, and then carry it later on to have it be your first meal. It doesn't really matter. It's an easy meal to get exactly right, and it's an easy meal to scale for how you want to feel throughout the day. You can up the carb intake if you have a more active day. You can up the protein intake if you want to kind of have a higher level of satiety as you go throughout the morning and as you head into lunch. It doesn't matter, but it's a meal that you can always get right 100% of the time, that you can create for yourself, and you know exactly what you're getting. So the breakfast I just made is anywhere from 600 to 700 calories. The whole macro breakdown is about 18 grams of fat, 48 grams of carbs, and about like 55, 60 grams of protein. Now, that's a little bit higher on the end of protein. However, I'm pretending that I don't have that active of a day and I really want to stay full throughout lunch. So I really want to get up my protein intake. And let's say I worked out last night. So that's why I structured this breakfast the way I did. Generally, my breakfast will consist of a very similar omelet. I might put in an extra egg or take away some of the egg whites depending on what I have available. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you win breakfast, it's one step closer to being a little bit more structured with your diet. Lunch plans, if you don't bring lunch to work, and dinner plans, if you're going out with friends, can change. They're very hard to scale if you're not going straight home to cook your own food. So if you win breakfast, that's one meal of the day, depending on how many meals you eat, that you know what you're getting. You know exactly how much you're putting into your body, and you know exactly how it's gonna make you feel. So if you are trying to make a more structured lifestyle in terms of how you're eating, win breakfast. It's one of the easiest things you could do, and you could take foods that you know make you feel good and segue them out in that in certain allotments, depending on your goals, that will make you feel best. There is no perfect structured breakfast. However, I will say that for me personally, I like to have like a middle of the ground carb intake, a little bit of the higher end protein just because I don't want to get super hungry right away at work, and then I'll have fat that hovers a little bit lower. And my rationale for this is this. One, I like to eat carbs a little bit later in the day. It kind of helps me sleep a little bit better, and it kind of helps me with my energy, like pretty much how I spend it throughout the day and giving me energy, because I usually lift after work, after I've already worked like 8 to 10 to 12 hours. Then I'll have my fat be a little bit on the lower end, so anywhere around like 10 to 15 grams is usually pretty standard for me. And the reasoning being is because on the topic of lunch and dinner always changing, that's a meal that usually will have more fat, especially if you go out to eat. So by keeping my fat a little bit lower in the morning, I know I have a little bit more wiggle room as the day goes on in terms of just overall caloric intake, especially if your goal is maintaining a certain body fat or just caloric intake for body weight purposes. And then That's pretty much how I structure it. That will change a little bit depending on if I'm in meet prep, if I'm training early in the morning, and so forth. So if I train early in the morning, for example, the way that would change is that I would keep my fat still low, but I would up my carb intake to about 75 grams, maybe even 100 grams, depending on how hard I went. And then I would segue that out, and it would look like a little bit of a less carb intake throughout the day. So I would still have a pretty carb heavy-ish lunch, depending on my overall energy levels. And then as opposed to upping my carbs for dinner to help me sleep, I would lower them a little bit because I know already got a lot of carbs in the morning after my workout. And generally at that point, since I trained early in the morning, I'll already be a little bit tired, so I don't have to rely on having a little bit more carbs in my system to help me sleep. So that's one tip I have for nutrition, especially for folks who want to maintain a certain level, is win breakfast. It's super easy. It's a great first step, and it's going to help you build confidence with your abilities to choose foods that make you feel good based on your goals. All right, so we are back to another workout. So now today is a technique day, and I'm working on Sumo Technique, and in this video I'm going to share 3 different ways to do so. The first way is with a mid pause at the shin. So it's right at the mid shin. You're going to pause, hold for a few seconds, really focus on engaging that lats. The reason I love this technique cue is because it helps you really pull that bar in when it might be getting away from you. If you're ready to kick it up a notch, you can try a multi-part paused tempo deadlift. So right here, I do 2 holds on the concentric, right at the mid shin, right above the knee. I lock it out, and then I do again on the eccentric, right above the knee at mid shin, and I try to hold for about a second or 2, depending on the overall reps and sets I'm going with the intensity. This is a great variation for folks who really want to control weight, but I would highly recommend starting lighter if you're going to add this into more of your technique training. The third method I use is for folks who have a problem with the bar getting away from them. So set a foam roller about 2 to 3 inches in front of you, and then you're going to go through your normal reps. Now the goal here is obviously not knocking down the foam roller. So if you're knocking down the foam roller, then there's a good chance that either your hips are rising quickly, you're letting that bar get away from you. But long story short, you want that bar to come up and come back down in a relatively similar state. So that means you're hinging correctly at the top, you're lowering the bar in control, and you're not swinging it away from you. The next accessories I moved to today on my more of technique focused deadlift day, let's call it, are rows. So I did want to get in some loading on my back. So what I'll do is I'll do a heavier row first, and I'll really focus on driving up with a set back. And I believe this is more of like an Ed Cohn style row where you used to load them a little bit heavier and add a little bit of a jerk to them. And then to finish off, once I'm feeling a little bit more fatigued, I'll do more of your like strict pin lay row and really focus on keeping that back in control and keeping those hips nice and stable as I'm hinged throughout the full movement. And this is a great kind of finisher for targeting the lats. Now, 2 other movements I performed today to really focus on my lats is one, like more of a kneeling single arm row, and this is because I don't have a cable row machine. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, this is a great variation I find to use for the lats and really focus on the hypertrophy of them and really feeling the full contraction. So in this, I try to move nice and slow and really drive that elbow in and back. And some mental cues here to think about are when you're setting up, try to get at a parallel stance. You could be a little bit above it if you need to, but I prefer to sit just at parallel, if not just above it, just because that helps me get my back nice and set. And so as I contract through, I can really feel that lat engage. This is a really heavily focus on mind-muscle connection for this exercise. The last thing I'm going to show you guys in this video is one of my favorite warm-ups for the deadlift. No matter if I'm conventional or sumo pulling, something that I always like to do is prime my glutes and my hinge mechanics. So what I'll do is I'll put a band right about my knees, just above them, and I'll really focus on keeping them tracking correctly over my toes or just outside of them, depending on how you set up. And here's a side view. So as you can see, we're gonna stop at the top, hinge back, keeping that nice set back, really focus on maintaining that tension. That kettlebell is tracking in a singular in a linear state, so it's going up and down in a similar state. So if you need a good warm-up for priming your deadlift hip hinge mechanics, I would highly recommend doing this. It's fantastic for targeting the glutes and also fantastic for just overall working what it feels like to have those hamstrings elongate and focus on what it's going to feel like before you load. Now you can do single arm too if you're feeling a little bit saucy and you really want to focus on your lats. That wraps up my second training vlog of this meet prep. It was a little bit more of a boring episode. I'm actually kind of sick right now, so that's why I had this technique day programmed in. I was actually supposed to get a little bit heavier on squats and presses, but I decided to opt for a movement that I'm a little bit more familiar with and it's a little bit easier on my body. And yes, that is actually a sumo deadlift. Squats are incredibly tough for me, and so are benching movements. So I included this technique day in. Hopefully some of the tips helped you. I think it's great to throw in a technique day probably once a month, if not bi-weekly, especially if you're a little bit newer, because I think working on the specificity of a movement with lighter weight and working through different tempos and different pauses is one way to see if you're lagging anywhere. So if you do find that your bar path is a little wonky in your sumo deadlift, try some of those tips out. Also, if you need a good warm-up, I would highly recommend using the kettlebell hinge with the band around your knees. It's fantastic. Do that for like 10 to 12 reps before you actually start loading. You can do 2 to 3 sets if you feel like you're a little bit cold and you really just want to drill down your hip hinge mechanics. But yeah, hopefully this video wasn't too difficult to get through. I edited it with Adobe Premiere, and I've never used that before, and I'm really bad at it. So I'm learning that skill. So maybe in like 3, 4, maybe 20 videos I'll be good at it. But until next time, see you later.